Good evening. Thank you. So my name is Zeke Stokes. I'm the Vice President of GLAAD. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have a conversation tonight in this amazing studio space that we're partnering with HBO on all summer about the intersection of LGBTQ and race in Hollywood. And I think it's going to be an amazing conversation. So thank you for being here. We're going to be taping this tonight and live streaming it tomorrow across our Facebook channel. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. And I'm excited to turn it over to my dear friend, Danielle Moodie-Mills, who's going to take us through tonight's conversation. Danielle?
Thank you, Zeke. Thanks, everyone, for coming. So I feel super gay because this is my first time in Provincetown ever. I've been told for years to come and have never, and it's magical, and I don't want to leave and go back to New York. So, yay. So my name is Danielle Moodie-Mills. I am the host of Woke AF on Sirius XM Progress. It's exactly what it sounds like. And it's a pop culture and political talk show on Sunday. So I'm super excited to be here and discuss this issue with this fantastic panel that I'm going to introduce. So first off, we have Amy Aniobi, who is the producer for Insecure HBO.
Thanks, guys.
I'm counting down the days for it to come back.
August 12th, y'all.
Yeah, I'm doing all the things. And then we have Wilson Cruz, who is the actor, LGBT activist, just brilliant, fabulous. There you are. And then we have Khary Septh, who is a journalist and co-founder and editor-in-chief of The 10th, whose tagline I love, Black, Gay, and Unbothered. Such is life. I was like, I want that on my tombstone. I mean, I'll credit you from the grave. Like, I didn't invent it. Okay. It did. But we should all think about it. So, really excited to talk about race and representation in LGBTQ Hollywood with you all today. And I want to start off by, first talking about the concept of intersectionality, right? And a phrase and a word that is thrown around a lot without the context of what it actually means. And so as we set the tone for what we're going to dig into this evening, I wanted to give you all an opportunity to talk about, for a minute, what intersectionality means to you, how you approach it in your work, in your life, and how it shows up for you. Amy, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, that's a big question.
I know.
That's a big-ass question. But I will say, I think it's something that you live. Every single day, there's never a day that I wake up and I'm only female or I'm only Black. It's both of these things. And as someone who isn't queer, but who is a big advocate of just everything that that represents, it's something that I think about for other people too, and for other audiences too. And I feel like in my work, it's something I always try and represent. It's kind of a weird thing, but my dad is very conservative, so I'm known to name queer characters after my dad in shows. Just so that if he ever notices, he'll figure that out.
That must make the holidays difficult.
Yeah, they're interesting, but it's I feel like it's something that you live, and any moment that you don't actually have the opportunity to forget that you're not two things or three things in some instances, because everyone else is reminding you every day. So the more you embrace it, the more you embrace your own skin and how comfortable you get to walk through the world.
Yeah, that's a big one. So I think of this, I'm going to be real. So, not that you weren't. I'm just saying, anyway.
Get real.
So I'm an actor, obviously. And I've been an actor now professionally for about 30 years. And I'm an openly gay man, an openly gay Latino man. And I feel like when I look back at the beginning of my career, that I spent a lot of that time trying to figure out who I needed to be for whom. And so if there was a role that came that was a gay role, I didn't want to be too Latino, didn't want to be too other, right? So I feel like I had to make up for it in some way. And then vice versa, right? Like if a role came to me that was not gay and it was a straight role, that I had to leave, that part of myself behind. And I feel like I spent a lot of my years until recently, I have to be honest, feeling that way. Doing less of it as years progressed, but feeling it being unnecessary. And the moment when that switched for me was Pulse. And I lost my aunt in that nightclub, and it was devastating to me. And it devastated me because those were literally my people, right? Those were majority Puerto Rican, first generation Puerto Ricans who were LGBT, most of them, who were escaping, a financial disaster on the island, and came there because they wanted to a better opportunity, only to have this happen to them. And so for me, it kind of woke me up. I thought, it woke me up to the fact that, again, or reminded me to the fact that, none of this time is promised us. And so I need to be all of who I am in every place that I go, not just in my work, but in my life. And I committed in that moment to never leaving any part of myself at the threshold of any door. And I'll tell you what, and then I'll shut up. It changed the way I walked through the world, but it also changed the way that people accepted me and looked at me and treated me. And I think that's because when you walk into a room with your whole self, it's powerful. And that power can't be denied, and people are attracted to you. So I urge anyone who's listening, who feels that pull to pick and choose parts of who you are, to do yourself the favor and be all of yourself at all times.
I love that, yes.
Beautifully said.
Trained media professionals.
Damn them. Damn them.
I mean, what we do at the time.
Let's pretend he didn't talk. Khary, what are your thoughts?
I don't even know what an intersection is. No, it's great, and I relate to that about showing up as one's whole self. Although, of course, there are so many holes within oneself at all times. I think what we do as a media platform, what I've done in sort of leading the charge of defining what it was we were going to be thinking about as a culture, right? And I don't mean defining dictatorially. I mean saying, this is a group of men and women that I relate to on a number of levels. What are we thinking about right now in the culture? Not just what we're putting out into the world for consumption, but what are we really considering, and what sort of lessons are we leaving behind for the next generation, perhaps? And what you realize is that these intersections, they're sort of limitless, right? But then they're also in different places, right? So there's a kid showing up to an intersection in St. Louis that's very different than the intersection uptown in Harlem, right? So then what it becomes is a situation where we no longer look at ourselves as just this monolith black folks, but we look at ourselves as small communities in different places. So it is our job at that point to kind of connect across all of these intersections, right? And understand one another better. I mean, in our community, specifically the black gay community, gay, queer, depending on your generation or identity, it's like a whole thing, right? But there's a need for more collectivism, right? So what we do is we say we're going to examine what those intersections are in your respective places, give them context, and then find all of those points to connect those dots, and then in essence become much more powerful as a result. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it's kind of how I look at these things. And it's very insular at the same time, for us at least. I think that we make work that assumes that the reader is a black queer kid anywhere in the world.
I think that you may be the only outlet that does that, which is amazing. To think about who is our audience, that black queer kid that is sitting someplace.
Right. And we'll talk about representation, but it became very apparent to us very early on in the process that what good would it be for us to make representations of marginalized people being those people ourselves, right? So this is a project for us that's about sort of the economics of media, the economics of media ownership. And I think that what we see with the work that you're doing and Issa leading the charge with Insecure and what's happening right now in Hollywood, I'm a passive observer, but I'm so proud of all the work that you guys have done. For Black showrunners, writers, I don't even know what the language that I should
It's
be
all
using
right.
to describe
Yeah,
these folks.
that covered
You've
it.
done
that
this.
covered
I mean, we've sat with Patrick Polk and had conversations.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's a whole thing. So I'm rambling, but
No,
yeah, there we go.
I think that to each of your points, what the power of intersectionality is the ability to be able to show up as your full self, right? Is the ability to be able to do that, and understanding that to do that is also a place of privilege, because there are not a lot of people that are able to show up as their full selves in the places in which they go, whether that be their job, right? If you're an hourly waged employee someplace in America, right, showing up on the lunch break to be able to talk about your significant other and what you did that weekend is still very taboo, especially now in the current climate of America that we're living in. So I say that to kind of move us into the current climate of the twilight zone in which we find ourselves living in. And I laugh so that I don't cry. I also drink. But given the lack of leadership that we have on the issues that each of you have worked on, that you live, that you discuss, which is the power of showing up as your full self, which is the power of showing the beauty and the complexity of the Black and brown experience, right? And being able to reflect that on the screen, in a magazine, on a website. Without leadership from our government, what do you all feel is the responsibility of the entertainment industry to be able to fill a void that has been left and that is seriously needed at this time? So, Khary, I'm going to start with you, and then we can.
Thank you. Start on that end.
And
I'm over here all tense.
And then we can work our way.
That
But I
was
think
real.
I think that, for you in particular, I'm assuming that is one of the reasons in why you founded the 10th, why you started it. So what do you think of as the responsibility of entertainment to not just entertain, but, educate in a way and expose so much to the world in which everybody doesn't get to participate in or show up in or feel comfortable in?
Yeah, I'll speak from a sort of media perspective. I don't, we did spend some time in Hollywood. Many of our friends from Hollywood are in the room tonight. Shouts to all you guys. But we went to Hollywood to examine what it really meant for a Black gay boy to show up with dreams in a place that had offered opportunity to folks like Langston Hughes, who wound up writing cotton parodies. Do you know what I'm saying? We go to explore what the real opportunities are in a particular place. I think it's in response to the time, quite simply, it's our responsibility to not just tell our own stories, but to shape the global conversation, right? So we don't just need to be talking about Black issues, but if they can create a narrative and they can vilify and they can sort of define what it is things like romanticism mean, and 18th century English poets are defining what it means in Hallmark cards today on shelves. I mean, I think it's up to us to look at the world as our palette at this point and say that we can create candidates, right? We can create superstars in Hollywood as well, and athletes, and we can say that these folks are important, and we can create agendas through these things as well. So I don't know, for us working in media, I don't know, we perhaps started internally, but now we're sort of looking outwardly, right? Doing what Vice does, except in a much more sensitive in a culturally authoritative way, to be honest with you, because they don't know what to do with these stories, yet they're there because they've got the backing to be there. They've got the odds, but you're still making media for a demographic that's 18 to 25-year-old white boys, right? So if our demographic is constantly people of color, and it ages 8 to 80, I mean, we've got folks on our teams, these elders of our community who've been around, and and publishing work and scholars galore, and then you've got social media stars who show up to be in conversation with one another, but not just about what it means to be them, but what it means to think about technology and our use of it. So that's our sort of way of responding to it, is to just wrestle power in the idea of making messages and crafting messages and candidates and politics and banking, et cetera.
Yeah. Wilson. Yeah.
So they want to erase us, right? I mean, that's what they want. They want us to be invisible. And when I say they, I mean this junta in the White House. So the only appropriate response from the media has to be that it play the role that it should have always played, which is to be a mirror to society, to reflect back who we really are. I think more than ever, our shows and our films and our plays need to reflect all of the people in this country. And we need to finally come to grips and stop ignoring the fact that that the only stories that are interesting are not just white, straight, cisgender stories. That there is a whole experience out there that people who are not those things are having, and that those are stories worth telling, and that those are lives worth reflecting. And that can be an answer to the fact that they want to erase us. So, you know, this moment that people are talking about in Hollywood, this diversity moment, you know, there's a sense out there right now, I feel, that people are like, oh, isn't it so great that we're finally having this colorblind casting moment where networks and studios are actively diversifying their casts and writing rooms. And I'm like, well, what took you so long, right? Like, this isn't you're not doing me any favors, right?
They want to be applauded.
Right,
Let's be clear. They want to be celebrated.
I'm doing you a favor. We're doing you a favor by bringing our talents and the fact that we bring an audience that is worthy of having with us. So, you know, I think that media needs to, as I said, reflect who we really are and what our lives are really like, so that this administration and, you know, these gangsters can't get away with erasing us in our lives.
Because I don't even think that it's the erasure of who we are as people that are not white, straight, cis, and wealthy, right, and male. It's not even just the erasure, but it's also to be ashamed, right, of who you are, of how you show up, and make that seem as if it is abnormal, right? Like, oh, you had 8 years of something that was really good. But that wasn't reality. Like, that was the fantasy that we're being sold, and then this, what we're living in right now is the reality.
Can I just say one?
Yeah, please.
So sorry.
Do not apologize.
I like listening to you.
She talks so much. So it just reminds me of, I saw Boys in the Band on Broadway just a couple weeks ago. And I had some friends of mine, I'm not gonna lie, my friends of color, gay men of color, who were like, I don't know if you should go see that, Wilson, you know, because you have lots of opinions and you might your head might explode in that theater. And I was like, well, okay, no, but I'm gonna go. So I go. And I went in knowing that this was a period piece, right? This is not a conversation. This show is not a conversation that would or should happen today. But what happened to me when the lights went down, the very first thought I had when the lights went out, and those performances, which were amazing, were over, I thought, that's what oppression looks like. That play should be seen by every LGBT queer person of color or white, because it is a reminder of what happens to a community when they are oppressed. We turn inward and see our shame and actively say hateful things to ourselves, because that's what's being told to us. That's what we're being fed. And when we're done with ourselves, we turn on each other. And that's what that play is about. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when you oppress a people. So I think it might be over. I might be talking, too late for people to see it. But we have to remember that that's what happens to a community.
But I also think that like all those types of stories are still valid to be seen now. Yeah. It's this thing where, first of all, let's not get it twisted. Like everyone's like, oh, there's so many people of color on TV. Right. Black writers make up 3%. 3% of the writers in Hollywood. And there aren't even statistics on gay writers because some people don't report and some people are still closeted. So it's like, that's how small it is. And another note, interrupt me at any time. This was intended to be a black and people of color like gay panel. And Ben Corey Jones, who's another producer on our show. We have 4 queer writers on Insecure. None of them could be here. So I'm here, guys. But like, as a result, interrupt me as much as you want. But all that to say, it's like, I find sometimes stories, I react negatively to stories that only show the negative. Like, I'll admit it here on film that I've never seen 12 Years a Slave because I cannot see a black woman get beat on screen anymore. I can't. But I also sometimes react a little negatively to stories that are always super positive because I'm just like, wait, but whose experience is that? That like no one's talking about color ever. Right. Like on a network sitcom where like Damon Wayans Jr. is like friends with all these white people. Literally shows I've worked for. So I love them, but it is kind of like no one talks about race ever. And so it's like both extremes feel weird. And I think that's why I love shows like Insecure and shows like Pose on FX. And like, because they show that we can live in the middle. We can have good days and bad days. We can be happy, we can be sad, we can be oppressed, but we can also be liberated. And that shit matters. Seeing both sides of that perspective matters. And as a creator, to your question, like when you're creating content for an audience that is always like, all of you guys are feeling these things at different points in your day. You're not always on top. You're not always in Provincetown. Sometimes you got to go home. And it's like, sometimes you go to Portland. And so it's like, you have to like, that was a specific shout out to someone in this audience. But it's like, I just mean like a white ass town where you feel awkward.
Like,
so
I was like, is that what the kids are saying today?
But it's like you are experiencing different emotions at any given time. And so the shows that get to display that, I think are so important and are always going to, not to pat myself on the back, but like are always going to resonate with their audience because they get to experience what it is to be human and real and fully realized, not lopsided, right. Which is what we have been in the past. And it isn't fair anymore and it isn't happening as much anymore, which makes me very proud to be a creator.
I feel like there has been so much work. So much work has been done to get to this space, right? Where you can actually see the fullness of people of color and their experiences on television and in film. And so, Amy, specifically for you, though, like around Insecure, which has been a breakout hit, right? But, for some of us that had been following Issa Rae, like from Black and Sexy TV and from like the beginning, this is not an overnight success story, right? There are lots of no's and lots of doors that were closed in faces because the white executives that were able to that have the power to greenlight are like, well, ain't nobody gonna really like that, right? Like it's not really gonna resonate. So how do you, with this success, how do you use it in order to keep the door open? Because for other creators and folks to come behind and continue down the path that you all have been walking down. Because, I have had the privilege of being able to see all of these different pieces as they were building, not just like at the moment of success on the red carpet at the Emmys, but being able to watch all of these individuals like work and do it, right? So how do you keep the door open so that you turn what many are saying is the Black Renaissance 2.0 moment into a sustainable movement that isn't fleeting?
Yeah, and I think there are 2 ways. One, I think in the 90s, like and I know I've said this on a couple panels, so sorry if some of you have heard this before, but I think in the post like UPN, WB era, when all of those black shows went away, the people who had success were sort of in this point of being like, it's you or it's me. And it was like, if it's you or it's me, and it better be me. And I think now there's been a change where it's you and it's me, or it's none of us. And it's like, that has really changed the way that we move through this industry. Issa is someone who, like, I wrote on Awkward Black Girl. You know, I was at Stanford when she made Dorm Diaries. I've watched her all the way through to this present moment, and seeing that moment, like any job I would get as a writer on a various number of white shows, I would always email her and be like, oh, I'm on this white ass show. And then she would be like, girl, congratulations, look at you shine. And I'm like, say the word and I'll come back to you. Just say the motherfucking word, I gotta get out of here. And so it's like, and then when it came around, like seeing how many people from the Awkward Black Girl world, if you watch the show, Cece's on the show. You know, if you watch the show, the guy who played the intern is on the show. It's like she has brought the people with her, because it's not just me, it's you and it's me, or it's none of us. And I think, like, you watch Lena Waithe and how she mentors, all of that, it matters. And so the second part of that is encouraging people to not just do the thing that seems to be getting all the shine. And this is the hardest part, and I still haven't quite figured out how to do this. But writers, directors, actors, we tend to get a little bit more like press time and like in the spotlight. But there are all these other jobs that control the pipeline. There are executives, there's music producers and supervisors, there are studio heads and all those things. And I'm trying to work to get people of color over there. Because it's like, until we have Channing Dungey who can pull the plug on Roseanne, we have Roseanne, you know? And it's like, you need a sister who's going to say, okay, I've had enough of this. I warned y'all, I'm pulling it. And it's like, if it wasn't her, it wouldn't have happened. So it's two-pronged. It's not only supporting the people who are doing what you're doing, but encouraging people who are doing something different from you're doing to strive to do that too.
I feel like we were, about 10 years ago, we were still in the era of want, right? We want to see ourselves on TV. We want to see ourselves represented. And now we're in the era of demand. We're at a point where we're not just wanting anymore, where I feel as a movement, as a people, we feel our power and are at a place where we can demand it. And that's what's happening. That's why you're seeing writers' rooms fill up with people of color and women. And trans people. And I think the other thing that we have to be, that this era calls us to be, is better allies. It's not just about pulling our own up, but, you know, as people of color, we have to look out for immigrants, we have to look out for women, we have to look out for trans people, you know, and that goes for all of us, right? And I know that sounds like a heavy burden, but if we're all carrying each other's weight, we're as light as a feather, and we're unstoppable. But we have to remember that we're not in this alone, that it takes, you know, it takes someone like you to go, to say, look at your writer's room and go, we don't have an Asian woman on the show, you know what I mean, or whatever.
Literally a thing I've been thinking about.
Being aware, just being aware is part of it. So, yeah.
You know, one of the, I have always worked and strived in various careers and positions that I've had to make representation matter, right? Like I say that because, you know, Black Panther. Can we just have a moment? So Black Panther comes out. It is, you know, over $1 billion now at the box office, playing for the first time in countries that never show Black films. And I mean, like, never. Like, they didn't see the color purple. Like, they have nothing, right? And so China,
and not because
Vietnam.
They didn't want
No.
Because they weren't given.
Because they weren't given the opportunity to see it. And so there was it's almost as if a transmitter went off and began to circulate these images and experiences and intelligence and beauty of Blackness, right? That we've never seen on an international scale. Khary, I'm coming to you because in the 10th, the images that you show of Black queerness is just, it's breathtaking, right? And it shows a side of us and our community and like the beauty and the artistry that we don't ever get to see. And I want to hear from you as to why that is so important, because I feel like people need to understand what it feels like to flip through magazines still, to go into your local market and see all of the covers and ain't nobody look like you. Okay? And even if they do, right, sometimes are of color, it is of the olive tone that looks something like the Hunger Games. I don't know what the fuck you are, right? So, which means that, like, it is not explicitly anything. It's purposeful. This is branding. I'm in PR. It's purposeful so that everybody can see a little bit of themselves. But to go and to still, 2018, you're walking in a magazine aisle, nothing looks like you. You're flipping through, you're talking about 3% of people in writers' rooms are Black people and people of color. Like, that's minuscule, right? So how do you talk about when you're sitting and you're kind of looking and creating the next issue, the next volume? Who are you thinking about, and why is it so important to put it out, knowing that you have had various barriers, economic barriers that have been put in your place, not because the art isn't good, not because the content isn't great, but because somebody thinks that I can't sell it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, well, that's so true, and great insight into what we really do go through at the magazine to make what is essentially a glossy book, but ultimately it's posing as that, and it's a community organizing exercise, to be honest with you. And it's important for a number of reasons, because collectivity and manpower, brain power, girl power, those things are more important than anything, because those are the things that move mountains, to be honest. And it's interesting. Not only are we making the images, but these are all Black, queer artists, thinkers, intellectuals, social media stars, it boys and girls. I mean, this is just us coming to the table and saying, not only will we present these images to the world, but we will be in control of our own sort of cipher of how we work, right? And there are no such things as respectability politics or anything that is right, wrong, out of play, or otherwise. And it's interesting to see kids come to us and want to contribute and say, oh, I want to come on, I'd love to intern. Oh, you don't need to intern here. Create your job. Okay, great. Now you're a food editor, right? Name yourself, create yourself, right? And in our world, we've also been able to just remove the presence of sort of whiteness, if you will. So every hand, every writer, every photographer, retoucher, down to the printer, right? But this is where you get into the economics of things, right? Because owning a printing press is expensive business, right? Anyone can make a magazine, but can you run the machines, you know what I mean, and pay the tab to get 5,000 issues across the world like we're doing at this point? So for us, it's not only the responsibility to represent ourselves, but it's also to create jobs and economics and economies around this. You're in Provincetown, and we say to ourselves all the time, well, this should be happening in a Black gay beach resorts town, right? But those things don't exist.
Where that at? Yeah, because
Right,
I would
those things,
go.
they don't exist.
I was gonna say, where that at?
Right? Yeah. I mean, there are. Yeah. So, you know, our next article is Jamestown 3.0, conversations about what does it mean to reverse colonize a town that, let's say, white queens showed up to in the 90s to sell antiques in. I'm referring to a small town that I now live in. Whereas over here you had an exodus of folks upstate New York and Hudson. They moved up in the 90s. Rents got high on Madison and in Chelsea. And here you have, again, a town taken over by a community of people who understand the value of their design-minded thinking, right? And they protected themselves on that street, and they protect themselves on this cape, right? So it's interesting to us to come here to be, you know, get down to the economics of what it means to represent yourself. I've got to come here and represent myself, but I got to spend $10,000 a week to rent someone's Airbnb, but I'd love to throw that money to a Black man or woman. Do you know what I'm saying? So for us,
No, I know what you're saying.
you know, it's like one of those things. It's like, is it about the representation, or is it about this sort of idealistic state that I would love to create? And I don't know that it's that profitable. I don't know if it's really that glamorous when you get down to it, right? Because there's a lot of sleeping on park benches and things like that. And I don't mean sort of metaphorically, I mean literally sleeping on park benches to make this work happen. But if we don't exist, there, like you said, there's 3%, 1% perhaps. If we don't exist, a friend of mine publishes a book called Hello, Mister. And it's interesting, beautiful magazine, dear friend of mine, and we're both editors. We started on the same day. And it's interesting, he announced the end of his, the magazine on July 10th. And we had a moment, we reached out, and it was a moment for me because I actually got super depressed. I was like, well, I'm exhausted. I would love a break. I would take 2 issues off. As a matter of fact, publishing once a year is enough, right? But if we disappear, there's nothing. If Essence disappears, and I'm not very critical of other Black queer publications or folks working in media, because if you're on that stage and you're showing up, we need more, because I actually would love to take a break. At this point, I just don't think that I'll be able to.
But you bring up such a good point. I often, on my show and in life, talking about the need to take a break before you have a breakdown, because just walking through life as a person of color who is also queer, who is also a woman, who could also be, a variety, like all of these things, it is to walk through life clenched like this, right? It is to walk through life wholly clenched because there is nonstop, just manage, nonstop tennis balls coming at you all day long, right? Some hits are harder than others. And so the responsibility and the burden to put your life, your art out there, to show it, right? To dig it up, to be the curator of it and the holder of it and the sharer of that is a lot, right? And it's a lot when you have no support. So for all of you, like, how do you walk through that? What does taking a break before you have a breakdown look like? Because you joke, Amy, and you say, well, you're calling up Issa and you're just like, girl, I'm in another white writing room, like where I'm the only one. And we can laugh about that because us on this stage know exactly what it's like to be the only Black face in a white space, right? And as one of my professors said to me a long time ago, her daughter was like 6 at the time, Black daughter, white professor, and her daughter said, Mommy, sometimes I just feel like a speckle of pepper in a sea of salt. And she was 5 when she said that, right? So to understand that you are other from such a young age, but then to know that, as we know that on this stage, but then to put on the armor every day because you know that if you don't do battle, somebody else is going to lay on the battlefield. Like, how do you address that?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question because, like, I have very often, as I'm sure we all have, come very close to or even been in a point of breakdown because it's so exhausting to know who you are and for no one else to see you. It's exhausting. And I know one of the things, like, self-care is real, and yeah, we can say, oh, we like candles, we come to Provincetown, but also self-care of fellowship, I think is so important. I think there are things I wouldn't have gotten through if I didn't have people who knew what I was doing. In my grad school program, I did the MFA program at UCLA in screenwriting. There are 24 people in my class. Of those 24, there were 10 who wanted to do television. Of those 10, there were 2 who wanted to write comedy. And the other girl actually happened to be Black. And we're best friends. We've created a web series together. We have a web series called Lisa and Amy Are Black. And she was my North Star. There were shows I was on that were so terrible. And I would just be like, I have to do this because until we get to a place where Lisa and I are in the same room, where we don't cancel each other out because we're both Black and there's only one Black character, I haven't done my job. And I would call her and be like, oh my God, what's happening? And we would cry on the phone to each other about shit we were going through. It's like, I remember the day that I fell in love with, like, nobody loves their agents in LA, but I love my agents. And I had 2 women. And I remember, this is just like women on women. Like, at the beginning, I was like, I don't want 2 women. I want a man because he's going to be tough and negotiate stronger for me. And then the day that I had to call them crying because a producer on a show was like stealing my chair so I didn't have a place to sit, wasn't passing me the lunch menu, was going, every time I pitched. And And I was like, what's happening? And I was like, I could feel myself getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I called them and I was sobbing on the phone to them because I was like, I'm going to lose this job and then I'm never going to work again because I'm the youngest person in the room. I'm the blackest person in the room. I wore a Tupac shirt one day. Everyone looked at me crazy. And I was like, and I'm the only one of only 2 females in the room. I'm going to die. Yeah. And they were like, no, march back in there and ask him what his problem is. And I having the strength of strong women who had been through shit and could say, no, Amy, we know you're amazing. Go back in there and ask him. And I did. And it was awkward and it was terrible. But at the end of the day, we both didn't get invited back to that show. And so
if I'm not coming back, you ain't coming back either.
I was over here thinking that he was the gate, but he wasn't. Someone else is always the gate. So it's like if you don't have those people that you can turn to and say, hey, I've got your back no matter what. There's nothing you can bring me that's going to make me think less of you. There's nothing you can tell me that's going to make me doubt you. I believe in your greatness because you believe in mine. We have to support each other. If you don't have that, then it's really, really hard. And I think that that's the only thing, to be honest, that's gotten me through the darkest moments is having fellowship.
To piggyback on that, so, for a long time, there were a handful of openly gay actors of color, and
literally a handful.
Like literally a handful, to the point where we would get auditions and we would call each other and be like, "What time are you going in?" You know what I mean? And like we walk in and be like, "Hey girl, how are you? You do good. This one's yours." You know what I mean? But it got to the point where, early on, of course, we all knew who each other were, and we respected each other, but we were kind of fearful of each other because, that's the person standing in the way of my good government check. And but then we all got to a point where we figured something out, which is your job is your job and my job is my job. So if I didn't get that job and Alec Mapa got it, that's because that was Alec Mapa's job. And I root for Alec Mapa to work because Alec Mapa is amazing.
Exactly.
Daryl Stevens got that job, that's because Daryl Stevens is amazing. And we need Daryl Stevens and people need to see him. And that's his job. So and we cheered each other on, right? So his getting a job was a win for me because his story is partly my story, and that story is getting told. And I trust him because he's an awesome actor. So I'm not coming to work or coming to my work from a place of lack. Mm-hmm. I'm coming to it as, this is my take on the role, that's his take on the role, they're both valid. It's up to you. But I love my brother, and I'm glad that he's here. And it's about creating that community.
I think that it must be so difficult to do, though, when you're set up in an industry where you're pit against other people, where you're told. I mean, that's what's beautiful about what's transpiring right now, and hoping again that this moment is a movement and that it isn't fleeting, because the idea that you're constantly pit, the idea that there can only be one black character, only one queer Latino character, only one black outlet, right, that everybody can read. And so if it ain't Essence, then it's, it's probably, but it's that we don't have the time, because I would talk to you about the various systems that are at play. Yeah. Why that is that,
you're right.
But I don't have the time.
Yeah.
But if I did, I would.
But it's interesting because we spend so much time, in the archives, and a quite profound moment for us was sitting with, issues of W. Du Bois's Crisis from the 20s and flipping through the pages and understanding that black folk actually had a much more sophisticated worldview when they were forced to kind of have a kind of diasporic approach to collectivism, right? So you're talking about a book that was completely financed by black ads and black universities and pharmacies and local businesses. And what happened post-segregation is that at that point we did become the only ones because we were looking to everyone else for opportunities. Yep. And that's what I go so off for you guys. Here you have a woman that created a show, from the ground up, and now you have a writer's room. But there's no lack really in the world, like you said, but I want my opportunities to come from black folk, right? Yeah. Because if I can get through that door and connect to you, and I mean, this is a problem for us as black folks too, right? Friend or foe, friend or foe. having to negotiate, is this opportunity or is this actually somebody trying to cut me off at the turn? So I think what needs to happen is this sort of psychological reprogramming, not only of what opportunities we're going for, but who's providing them for us. I think about Oprah all the time, where she's done, and that trick that she's played on the market with this new programming and all of these amazing directors coming to the table and these shows documenting mass incarceration and what's really happening in the community. This is something new. This is something that she had to build to. So
she's doing the pipeline that you're talking about. You know what I mean? That's
correct. There's that.
Between her, Ava, Beyonce.
Right.
I'm like, these are all people who are saying like, you let me in the door. Well, I left it open. And I'm like, that's super valuable.
Right. Exactly. So and it's sacrifice too, right? Like it's not just saying, or it's not an empty notion. What are you willing to sacrifice for your brother? I think a hierarchy of love that puts community first is what, for the self even, is what's worked for sort of us at the 10th, really, right? Because it means that we never go without. We've got, Black folks, our networks are limited, right? I mean, you're in Hollywood, but what about when you're gonna build a restaurant, you need an architect? And then that building needs to be inspected. I mean, I would love to create some sort of network where every point of contact for us to survive and to thrive, where opportunity is coming from ourselves. And if you start in Hollywood and in media and these places where kids are naturally attracted to, and you start to shift the mind, which is what we do on the pages of the magazine, I think we'll find ourselves in a much better position.
Yeah, and I think that those are the things that we need to think about. It's an expansive way to show up. It's also the responsibility of the thing. It's the responsibility and the burden of that. But understanding that we should exist in a space where we can do for ourselves, where we can create the studios, the spaces, the stories, an industry that revolves around our representation, right? Because if you think about it, when people hear that, they think about the separateness of it. But you think that, do you know how long it took for you all to break into where you are, right? Because separateness was created. This way of thinking isn't so much separate but expansive in the idea of the possibility of what it means that we can do when we come together, what it means that we can do when we lift and climb at the same time, right? When we walk through the doors and leave them open for other people.
But also what I feel in this moment of, upheaval, to put it mildly, I feel like and maybe it's just me and my rose-colored glasses, but I feel like we are being our best cheerleaders too, right? I see out there in social media people celebrating other people's wins and blowing other people up, right? I feel like people are picking up the slack that some media, that the mainstream media leaves behind, right? That I feel like we're Black actors are celebrating, Black designers, or or musicians are celebrating, a performance by so and so, or a TV show, or you know what I mean. Like I feel like there's a lot of that going on, especially in the Twitter sphere and Instagram. You know what I mean? And I think that conversation is really valuable too.
Well, it's so interesting because I've had a conversation once with some fellow writers who were sort of asking like, when do we get to the place where we get to critique each other? Because we kind of can't yet.
No.
Like I think we're still at a place where we have to be like, it's all great.
Yeah, it's all of it's fantastic.
Exactly, every show. and I'm happy to be in that space. But there was sort of this like, we had this like weird conversation where someone was like, well, do you really like it? And it was like, I didn't love the character development. And everyone was very shyly being like, I don't know if it's actually good. But it's like, but yeah, I blew him up on social media and I told everyone to watch. And it was like, you have to do that.
I bought out the theater and I told everybody to go.
Exactly. It's like, we have to do that. And I'm happy to. But I think there's something like, even as you recognize that feeling, I feel like as creators, yes, we're all like kumbaya-ing each other and it's so wonderful. But I do think it is natural and human to sometimes see someone else's success and go, why not me? Yeah. And I think that the thing is almost like you did with like your fellow actors and you're like, that's his job, it's fine. It's also like realizing, like not beating yourself up for that feeling and realizing that's natural, but also it doesn't serve you. And it's actually impeding your process towards reaching your own creative intelligence. And so it's like being able to let that go and say, okay, I have critiques, but at the end of the day, is it one more voice that's out there showing the thing that I want to show? That's what matters more.
For sure.
Guys, our time is up, which is like absurd.
I'm so glad we had this time together.
I want to thank such an amazing panel. Such an amazing panel. You all are fantastic. The conversation was fantastic. You all look good too, which made this easier. Thank you to all of you for coming. It was great. Thank you to GLAAD, to HBO for this opportunity. Really tremendous, really tremendous. So I hope that we continue the conversation.
Thank you so much for leading the conversation. Gorgeous and talented and well-spoken. Thank you so much.
And now, Rose.